and welcome to the Bible study from Black Mountain Presbyterian Church's Presbyterian Women. Now, this Bible study is based on the Horizons Bible study titled What My Grandmothers Taught Me. I don't always follow the study book, so I encourage you to read the book as well because there's a lot of good information in that. Let's begin in prayer. Creating and loving God, as we read your word together, may we allow it to read us. As we enter into your story, may we understand our own stories with more clarity and vision. Help us to remember that you have always worked through the lives of ordinary women and men with all their faults and failings, people like us. We bring our ordinary lives before you today. Transform our expectations so that as we study stories of the past, we may be open to your extraordinary future. Amen. So last month we talked about Tamar playing the prostitute and using her wits to claim the justice that had been denied to her. This month we're looking at Rahab, who's even more of an outsider than Tamar. She doesn't just play the prostitute, she is a prostitute. She's a foreigner, and yet her story is so striking that it's used as a standard of faithfulness for the early church. How's that for unexpected? We'll begin by going back to Matthew's genealogy of Jesus, the first chapter of Matthew, verses 3 through the first part of verse 5. Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Perez, the father of Hezron. Hezron, the father of Ram. Ram, the father of Amminadab. Amminadab, the father of Nahshon. Nahshon, the father of Salmon. Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. So to get context for this lesson, let's look at Judah's descendants. They have been wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. Early in the journey from Egypt, Moses sent spies out into the promised land, and when those spies came back, Joshua and Caleb said, yeah, the Canaanites are pretty fearsome, but God will give us victory. The other spies said, no, the Canaanites are too strong. We don't have a chance. An invasion will fail. And so the fearful Israelites believed those spies, and angry at their lack of faith, God sentenced them to wander in the desert for 40 years. None of that faithless generation would cross over Jordan into the promised land except Joshua and Caleb. Now the book of Joshua begins at the end of their wandering. The Lord has passed leadership of the Israelites over from Moses to Joshua, and Joshua's preparing the people of Israel to go into the promised land. He starts by sending out spies, just as Moses had done 40 years before. I'm reading from the second chapter of Joshua, verses 1 through 14. Then Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. Go, look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. The king of Jericho was told, look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land. So the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab, bring out the men who came to you and entered your house because they have come to spy out the land. But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. She said, yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they came from. At dusk, when it was time to close the gates to the city, they left. I don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly. You might catch them. But she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under stalks of flax that she had laid out on the roof. So the men set out in pursuit of the spies on the road that leads to the fords of the river Jordan. As soon as the pursuers had gone out, the gate was shut. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof and said to them, I know that the Lord has given you this land and that a great fear has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We've heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For your Lord is God of heaven above and earth below. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you'll show a kindness to my family because I've shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you'll spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you'll save us from death. Our lives for your lives, the men assured her. If you don't tell what we're doing, we'll treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land. What do you notice about the king and his men? I got to say, they seem easily misled. I wonder if they underestimated Rahab. What do you notice about the spies? What brought them to Rahab's home? What's your impression of Rahab? I mean, she recognizes the Hebrew men are spies and knows and respects the Hebrew God. She is clever and brave. Despite her status as a Gentile and a woman and a prostitute, the thing that impresses me most is she bargains with the spies as an equal and expects them to treat her as an equal. You might want to pause the video and take a moment to consider those questions and discuss them amongst yourselves. In verse 12, Rahab says to the spies, "Swear to me that you will show kindness to my family because I have shown kindness to you." Now, in the Hebrew, the word kindness is hesed. My pronunciation is probably horrible. Some translations say mercy or grace or compassion. In Psalms, it's often translated as loving kindness or steadfast love. But this is one of those words that doesn't translate easily from Hebrew into English. It's often used to describe the devotional piety of the people towards God or the love or mercy of God towards humanity. One Jewish scholar has said that it means something like loving covenant obligation. Rahab has shown chesed to the spies and asked that they show it to her. In verse 14, the spies respond that they will treat her with chesed, and another word, emet, meaning truth or faithfulness. So I ask, where have you seen chesed and emet, loyal love and faithfulness, expressed? Has it come sometimes from an unexpected place, like the spies receiving it from Rahab? Where have you offered it? Where have you observed it? Where have you received it? I encourage you to pause the video, ponder those questions for a bit. Our story continues in verses 15 through 24 in that second chapter of Joshua. So she let them down by a rope through the window, for the house she lived in was part of the city wall. She said to them, "Go to the hills so the pursuers will not find you. Hide yourselves there for 3 days until they return, and then go on your way." Now the men said to her, "This oath you made us swear will not be binding on us unless when we enter the land, you've tied this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and unless you've brought your father and your mother and your brothers and all your family into your house, if any of them go outside your house into the street, their blood will be on their own heads. We will not be responsible. As for those who are in the house with you, their blood will be on our head if a hand is laid on them. But if you tell what we're doing, we will be released from the oath you made us swear." "Agreed," she said. "Let it be as you say." So she sent them away, and they departed. And she tied the scarlet cord to the window. And when they left, they went into the hills and stayed 3 days until the pursuers had searched all along the road and returned without finding them. Then the 2 men started back. They went down out of the hills, forded the Jordan River. They came to Joshua, son of Nun, and they told him everything that had happened to them. They said to Joshua, "The Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands. All the people are melting in fear because of us." Now, Rahab's house formed a part of the city wall. I mean, it was vulnerable to attack. It was the first place to be breached in case of an attack. And, of course, on the good side, that did make it possible for the spies to escape the city even though the city gates had been shut. The spies seem especially careful to detail all the details of the argument. They warned Rahab not to tell the king about them, but the king already knew there were spies there. They warn Rahab's people that they will only be spared if they're inside her house, and they seem, they put the responsibility for all that on Rahab. It almost sounds like the fine print at the bottom of a contract. And did you notice when they returned to Judah, the spies' report just echoed Rahab's very words. They took that report about the people in Jericho melting in fear very seriously. The next 3 chapters of the book of Joshua tell about preparations for the battle, crossing the Jordan, and the beginnings of the attack on Jericho. Rahab's story comes up again as the Israelites attack Jericho in chapter 6, verses 22 through 25. Joshua said to the 2 men who had spied out the land, "Go into the prostitute's house and bring her out and all who belong to her in accordance with your oath to her." So the young men who had done the spying went in and brought out Rahab, her father and mother, her brothers and sisters, and all who belonged to her. They brought out her entire family and put them in a place outside the camp of Israel. Then they burned the whole city and everything in it, but they put the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron into the treasury of the Lord's house. But Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute with her family and all who belonged to her, because she hid the men Joshua had sent as spies to Jericho. And she lives among the Israelites to this day. So Rahab was saved, along with her father, mother, brothers, sisters, and all who belonged to her. Now, we know that there were males in her family. She had a father and brother, but for whatever reason, they're not taking their place as the head of the family. That phrase, all who belong to her, is exactly what's used to denote the head of a household. Rahab is the only woman in the Bible where that phrase is attached to her. Rahab the prostitute becomes Rahab the matriarch of a long line of people. This story is told in the past tense, long after the fact, but it closes with the line, "She lives among the Israelites to this day." Rahab's family line runs through the Israelites, as Matthew reports, from her husband Salmon all the way up to Jesus. So now that you've heard the story, why do you think Matthew included Rahab in his genealogy of Jesus? When we studied Tamar we talked about a Gentile outsider personifying righteousness. And in Rahab, we see a Gentile outsider who's personifying faith, putting her life, the lives of her family, into the hands of the Israelite God. The book of Hebrews includes a full chapter on the topic of faith. It begins with, "Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see." It goes on to commend those who demonstrated great faith, including Abraham, Moses, and others, including Rahab. Hebrews 11:31 says, "By faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she had welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient." James, writing to Christ's followers about faith and how faith should be transformed into action, refers to the way Rahab put her faith into action, saving the spies sent to Jericho. In James 2:25, "In the same way, was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction?" Now, while I was researching this lesson, I read some commentaries suggesting that Rahab had reformed and that she was actually just an innkeeper when the spies came to Jericho. A lot of the commentaries seemed uncomfortable with her profession or with her past, and I have some questions about that. First, if Rahab's reformed, why is she forever saddled with that title, Rahab the prostitute? I mean, even when she's praised as a paragon of faith, she's still called Rahab the prostitute. Now, I think Rahab's life did improve. I mean, she's married to Judah's descendant, Salmon. She bore Boaz, the grandfather of King David. But when those spies hid out at her house, I think she was supporting her family as a prostitute. And second, is it so hard to believe that a prostitute could perform a brave and faithful act on behalf of God's chosen people? The Bible is full of unexpected heroes. Moses transforms from a murderer in hiding to the leader of God's people. David gives in to his lust and impulsiveness, but he's acknowledged as Israel's greatest king. Paul, the missionary, was once Saul, the scourge of the Christians. Clearly, the men in Rahab's life weren't fulfilling their role to provide protection for her. Then, as now, prostitution is most often an act of desperation, a survival tactic rather than a life choice. And think about it. Women rarely choose prostitution as a profession. When a kindergarten teacher asks the kids, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" I don't think many kids imagine a future as a sex worker or a drug addict or a homeless tent dweller. People fall through the cracks. Bad things happen, but they are still always God's children. So, do we see Rahab in our midst, the one who reminds us that courage and faithfulness can come from unexpected places? Do we see a problem, a symptom of our moral decline, or do we see a survivor, a beloved child of God? God is busy working in unexpected places through the Rahabs of our world who are too often overlooked or discounted. We're blessed by God's chesed, kindness, compassion, steadfast mercy. How will we reflect it to those who are outsiders among us? Let's close with prayer. God of possibility, I look at Rahab and I see so much of myself, busy trying to feed all those mouths, bearing a load of responsibility, aging parents, young children, an ill neighbor. There's always something to be done. I often feel so insignificant, so voiceless. Important decisions seem to be made elsewhere out of my control, and yet Rahab was able to speak with courage when loyalty was needed. Give me the strength of Rahab not afraid to step outside the limits society's determined for me, confident in my own protective instincts and open to your surprising possibilities. Let Rahab teach me not to make assumptions that limit others in their search for your fullness of life. Amen. Thanks for watching, and go in peace.